So hi everyone, my name's Nikki. I work at Penfold. I'm the engineering manager here. I've been engineering manager for 3 years and a software developer for about 11 years now. I want to talk a bit about accelerating your career in a startup. I do think some of the things in here will potentially have a different opinion from the presentation that you just saw, and I'm going to focus a little bit more on the kind of beginning parts of your career from like junior to mid to senior, and how being in a startup can really kind of accelerate your career, essentially what it says. So let me just I'm going to just go through very touch on the career progression framework, the levels and key skills in each kind of bucket, why I think there's a real advantage in startups, and some of the challenges and trade-offs of being a startup, because it's obviously not all roses, and then quick summary, and then hopefully some questions at the end, if there are any. And so I think career progression is a really difficult one in tech, because I don't think the industry has any consistency. So what you would define as a junior and associate engineer in one company will be vastly different from another company. Engineer can encompass, someone with 2 years experience or 5 years experience. Senior engineers is a terminal, what they call a terminal role, where you may not ever move past senior engineer because it's such a wide bucket. So it's really hard to know what role to apply for, whether you have the right skill set, and also what to focus on to go from junior to mid to senior. And I think that it really boils down to kind of the work that you're doing, and in particular, two key aspects. I've stolen this engineering ladder from Honeycomb. I've put the link at the bottom there. I think that it's a really, really good visualization of what I believe to be kind of all you need to know about the engineering manager and the career progression framework. And that's to think of it in two aspects: ownership and scope. So their entry level job is that H1, the small circle at the bottom left there, going up to principal engineer, which is the H7. And really, as you get more senior, your ownership and scope grows. So where you'd be focused on a specific task and executing that task well at the entry level, when you kind of go into the more mid-level roles, you'll be focusing maybe on a feature, and then going up to a whole project, and then looking at the entire product, working with the product team on solution discovery, figuring out where we go with the product, the strategic vision, and then all the way up to the principal engineer, which is the company-wide problems. And so focusing on ownership and scope, I think is kind of the grounding foundations of like the key skills that we talk about. And so if we look at, I've just focused on junior, mid, and senior. There's obviously a bunch of stuff past senior, but I think this could take up, the first 10 years of your career easily. There's no real time frame on it. And, going from one to the other is all about, I think, different themes. So when you're a junior developer, it's really, the themes are around, how receptive you are to feedback, how proactive you are in terms of your own learning, and how well you can complete well-defined small tasks. And so execution and learning being a really key theme as a junior developer. And then when you think about, okay, well, what do I need to do to get to this mid-level? It's all around efficiency and independence. So that's kind of taking on more ambiguous, less defined pieces of work, being able to figure out what to do and to implement it with a degree of independence. Obviously, there's a lot of support, but it's about understanding that maybe this is not the whole picture, figuring out what needs to be done and then doing it. Expanding your knowledge of the code base to the point where you're really effective at debugging issues. And I think that's really key, especially with supporting the rest of the business and visibility to the rest of the business, if you're able to jump on issues and fix them. And then it's the fast pace of delivery as well. You're more confident in the code base, you're confident in your skills, and you're able to kind of get through work quite quickly. Then we move into the senior developer, which is more about the it's less about yourself and it's more about how the team are working, ensuring you're planning work and you're helping the team to work effectively. Looking at the like product roadmap, working with the product manager and designer on upcoming pieces of work, architecting large pieces of work to kind of make sure that it's scalable, but also understanding that you can't spend, a year working on this huge piece of work. And so understanding the trade-offs and the prioritization there. So the themes for the senior is more leadership and vision. And so where I think the advantage comes in with a startup is the opportunity you get to own things at a very junior level. If I just go back here from mid to senior, it's really hard to get the opportunity to show your leadership and vision. You need to be given that, the opportunity to take on that piece of work and to do it. And so in a startup, it doesn't really matter what level you are, as long as you're showing the kind of hunger and the desire to do it, along with being able to show that you can work at a good pace. And so I've got here visibility. So your communication, you're communicating directly with the rest of the business about this feature that you're owning. You can own features at a junior level. We don't kind of discriminate there. We obviously give you a lot of support, but you can take on that ownership and you can contribute to the entire code base. So as opposed to just kind of writing the code, pushing up and forgetting about it, you need to make sure that it's been deployed to production. The pipeline is passed. Any infrastructure that is needed, it's in there, ready for release. There's a whole kind of aspect to it that's not just about writing code, and you learn that in a startup because you are in a very small team. You don't really have the kind of luxury of passing off to a team that is solely responsible for infrastructure. It's the responsibility of yourself and the people that you're working with. And I just wanted to highlight an example in Penfold. Alex has given me permission to tell her story, but Alex joined as an associate engineer in November 2022. Associate engineer is what we call our junior level of engineer. I did look this up in Jira before when I was doing the presentation. So in the last year, she's owned 32 stories, and by story, I just mean a feature or a piece of work that is delivered to the user. To the end user. So she's owned 32 stories. She's amended some infrastructure. She created an S3 bucket with Terraform for one of her stories. She practically found and fixed several production issues, and she became an expert in our file processor, which is actually a really complicated piece of like a process that she became the expert and the go-to person on. And so in August, she was promoted to engineer. I think that's was that 9 months maybe, because she just showed she was given the opportunity and she showed the skills that she could do that job. And now she's working with our staff engineer on an internal admin app for our operations team, just the two of them, which is taking on a lot of ambiguous, not very well defined requirements and figuring out what needs to be done. So she's done an excellent job. Some other benefits, and this is where I think I will directly contradict the last presentation, is to figure out what you like the most. I don't really believe in specializing early in your career. I think that trying out a bunch of different things, front end, back end, infrastructure, data, to really figure out what you like and what grabs you, and staying a generalist kind of as long as you can. I personally think that's the best way to just make sure that you're going down the path that you like the most. And then working on your whole skill set. Again, there was talk about being quite coding and not communicating as much, but I think in a startup you can't really afford to not communicate. You need to be talking to the rest of the business. You need to be doing a lot of post-release monitoring. You get to hone not just your technical skill set, but what would be defined as soft skills. But again, I don't believe they're soft skills. I think they're absolutely necessary skills to to grow. So communication, decision making, prioritization, all of those things. Understanding prioritization and trade-offs is another one that, again, you're going to have to make those decisions quite early on in your career. Do you do this thing now? What is the impact? How many users is it affecting? Those kind of decisions that you're involved in, no matter what your level is. And then I think also one thing that I really liked when I joined a startup, and kind of why I started joining startups, is to gain insight into starting a company. You realize that the prioritization and the decision making is so different at a company that is at such an early stage versus a much larger Series A, Series B, or like a public company. You understand, and you get a lot of updates about funding rounds. You get to see a lot of stuff about starting a company that I wouldn't have known had I not joined a startup, and also I feel like set me up. So if I wanted to do that in the future, I think I could. And then lastly, just to see the impact of your work with users and become very user focused. Like what you're thinking about is, how do we grow our user base? And the user is kind of key to everything. And so not only when you release your work, you can see, and you're doing a post-release monitoring, and you can see how people are using it, what issues they're coming across. You get a lot of insight into user research sessions that product are doing, and you just, I think, become closer to the product. You're not just doing tickets, kind of pushing them through and then forgetting about them. I've kind of already talked about this slide, but what does ownership look like? It's not just developing and writing code. It's figuring out the QA plan. Again, we don't have any QA engineers. It's on us to test all of our work and make sure that it's ready to go. And then the communication and the monitoring afterwards. And of course, there are challenges and trade-offs to this. The more opportunity you have, the more responsibility you have. So where I think in a larger company, you may be afforded more time for professional development, you have to balance that in a startup with delivery. And so you have to be very driven and self-directed. You have to do self-directed learning. It just has to be that way. And you have to kind of push yourself to grow. There is in a smaller team, if you're one of 10 and in a team, and there are like 20 teams in a company, I feel like there's a little bit less pressure than if you are one of 4 developers in one team and that's it for the company. There's going to be a little more pressure on delivery, and so you just need to make sure that you're balancing those things, and you're not letting the delivery overwhelm you and not allowing you to do your kind of professional development. I do believe it's an environment where some people really thrive and some people find it quite hard. So I think that's definitely the biggest challenge of working at a startup. So in summary, just I think it's very rewarding, great way to grow your skills quickly. And I think the opportunities you get, I just don't believe that you'd get in the large company. I started out in a very large company as a grad, and then I think that was maybe like 8,000 people, 9,000 people, and then kind of going down and down into smaller companies. And now I think in Penfold, we're at 45 people, and I feel like the sweet spot really of size. And then just the trade-off to consider, more ownership, more accountability, which is a great opportunity, but also a little bit of pressure, I guess. I've added a couple of links for further reading. There's a progression.fyi website, and it's got loads of companies' progression frameworks. So you can see all the levels and what they expect of each level. And then there's an article on career paths in big tech and scale up. So I've talked more about startups, but there are other, obviously, the career paths in larger companies to consider as well, that people might be interested in. And that's it for me.
Hi, thank you so much for that. I think seeing the career progression path that you displayed, and actually you've just shared a link which I was looking at, I think is actually really important, because, you know, someone asked it, you know, in the previous talk, like, how do I go from a junior to mid? How do I then go from a mid to this? And I think if you can see them, and then you're, you know, in your case, you know, an engineering manager says to you, here are the skills you need in order to get to the next level, I think is so useful. I never had that. I've never seen it. And it was, do you know, it was only about 18 months ago when I saw something like this for the first time. And I was like, how have I been a developer for 8 years and never seen this?
Yeah.
Like, never seen one.
It's a question I get asked a lot of, you know, how do I get to the next level? And there's an aspect of you have to show that you are already doing it, essentially, which is it's partly on your manager to give you the opportunity to do it. And then it's on you also to find those opportunities and to show that you're capable of doing it. But I think in a startup, yeah, there really is just a lot more space to do that, I think.
Yeah, and also, you know, if you're then in, you know, and you're in a, you know, a 6-month review with, you know, your engineering manager or your tech lead or, you know, whoever, and you say like, well, I think I deserve this promotion, but, and yeah, and they're able to, rather than just say, you know, oh no, you know, you don't deserve it. You know, if someone's able to say, well, actually, you've got this, and this, but there's these 2 things you're lacking. Here's what you need to work on, and let's not wait for the next, you know, 1-to-1, but actually let's touch base in 3 months. I think it's so useful for like a personal growth, and we call it core skills here rather than soft skills, so we say tech skills.
Yeah, I don't like soft skills either. I just didn't know another word to say. I think the communication is something you have to start working on from the beginning, and it shouldn't be a secondary thing that you think about at all.
Yeah, so we call it a core skill, because we, you know, we think that's communication, good. All of those skills are core, and then tech skills and core skills. Yeah. If anyone's got any questions for Nikki, please do pop them in the chat. There is one come in, which is really good. So someone has asked, what do you think of, quote, startup style teams within, you know, a bigger corporate company?
As in, if a company has their kind of like digital ventures arm where they have like startup
I'm not
startup
too sure.
groups.
Yeah.
I've been in those situations where there's a large company and they want to go faster, so they create a little startup within the company. I think that it really depends on who they place in the startup. If they place everybody from the large company in there, you tend to get the same kind of issues that you would get in a large company with how slow you grow. But also, I do think there's a lack of pressure, that because you have the backing and the financial security, I'd say, of a large company, it doesn't truly work in the way a startup would work, because you know, early stage startups are there for their survival. They want to survive, they want to grow, and if you know that you're going to do that no matter what, it's there's less pressure, and people are less kind of driven by key metrics, North Star. They're more about showing that they're building something new quickly, no matter what it is. It could be something that people don't actually need, but if you like the security of you know, knowing that it's going to be okay no matter what, then it is a good way to get in, I think, and to experience what startups could be like. It's just slightly different, I think.
Yeah, and I think as a developer, I think it's such a good experience to have experience in all of these different, you know, situations and companies. You know, I remember before I freelanced, I looked at what I'd been doing over the last, 6 years, and then went, right, well, what have I not done? And then I went, oh, do you know what? I've never worked in just a product-based company. And so then I made that my goal, to be like, right, I'm going to find a job where I can do that for 18 months before I freelance, because as a freelancer, I wanted to have, covered as many grounds as possible and have experience in all of these, situations. And like you said, like a big corporate company is very different to a startup. You know, almost in a startup, you have to almost have more. I almost want to say more skills, because there aren't as many people there, so you need to wear different hats depending on what's going on.
It's the classic generalist versus specialist thing. I think that if you are in a company that can afford specialists, great. But you know, the reality is that you need to be a generalist, and there's no such thing as like, that's not my job in a startup. You get in and you figure it out, and so you grow so quickly and you learn so much. But you know, you may not be able to specialize in one thing. When I started out, I was mainly on the front end. I thought that that's what I liked the most, because that's the only thing I'd really done. And then when I moved into a smaller company, I was doing the back end. I actually realized I liked that way more. And you know, then I started kind of moving into more, well, picking up all the back end tickets basically, as opposed to front end tickets. But it's only when you start, you get exposed to it, you're like, oh, I actually really like this. And the flip side, I realized I don't love DevOps as much. You know, I had to do it, but I don't love it. It's not super exciting to me.
Yeah, and like you said, often if you're a startup, you don't have a dedicated DevOps person. And even something like documentation, you know, if you're a huge company, you may have someone whose job it is to write documentation, but in a startup, that's probably not there. So actually,
that would be lovely.
So you as the developer need to get good at writing documentation. So actually, the more hats you can wear, the better.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people saying thank you. Someone said, I definitely learn a lot every day, but as you said, it is a trade-off. Have you got any formal procedures in your companies at Penfold for prioritizing personal learning and development outside of direct learning on the job?
Yeah, so we have career development plans for all of the developers. We also make sure that it's normally Friday afternoon for a couple of hours. They've got personal development time. So people, again, block it out in their calendar, or they'll put something on Slack to say, I'm in PDP, you know, leave me alone. And so they get that time to do a course, and we'll pay for the course if they find one, or I find one that's really useful for them and what they want to do. So we've got these plans. We've got short-term goals, long-term goals, and their career development plans, and we've got actions where we say, okay, here are the themes. So the theme might be like, I want to. The long-term goal might be, I want to become a senior developer. Short-term goal is that, okay, I need to architect a big feature or something like that. In order to do that, I need to get better at system design, and so they'll be focused on system design for a while. We'll look at books, any kind of resources they need to do that, and then they'll have that dedicated time in the week to do it. I mean, it's only a couple of hours, but I think it's good to block out that time anyway outside, and everyone's quite respectful of that.
Yeah, and I think that's really important, because I think there's often a lot of expectation at companies that, well, if you want to learn this thing, you have to do it in your own time. But for me, I'm like, I don't want to be working outside of my work hours. Like, where's the work-life balance there? Like, I want to be spending time with the dog, and seeing friends and stuff. Like, I don't want to be coding outside my job. So I think it is really important that more companies allow that development in work hours, because tech moves at a fast pace. Like, you have to be learning, like, let's say your company does React, right, and they release some new features. If you want to do it in your spare time, fine. Pixel agrees. But you shouldn't have to do that, outside of your job. Someone has also asked, I wonder if you've experienced the same pivot away from technical time that the last speaker described.
As a manager?
Yes.
Yeah, so that's an interesting question. So engineering manager, again, it's a very ill-defined role, I think, it company to company. So you have different types of engineering manager. You have hands-on, hands-off. Like, they could be also a tech lead of a team, or they could be across multiple teams. When I joined Penfold, I was hands-off, so I wasn't actively writing code. I had to understand what was going on and the kind of architecture of what was happening, so I could help the tech leads make decisions. And it definitely was a very big shift in terms of like not having to lead technically, but in other ways. So you have to really tie up the product discovery and what was happening, the existing code base, and then kind of put it all together with a lot of support, I'd say, from the tech lead in order to make decisions. And then I've moved more recently, I've moved into more of a hands-on role as kind of personal preference, to be honest. I like to stay hands-on. And so I do little small tickets, but also I'm planning more technical work and then creating those tickets for the rest of the developers. It's possibly, as a software developer, I've got to admit, it's the biggest shift you can do in your career, is move from individual contributor to manager. And I think it's one of the hardest shifts. So I think that luckily it's not irreversible, right? You can go back and forth if you want to, but it's very different having been a developer for like 10 years to then all of a sudden not be writing code and not understanding that your output is like, your value is tied to your output. But then when you've been in meetings all day, you're like, what is my output today? Like, what did I do? Whereas as a developer, you're like, I did all these tickets today, I'm amazing. And then you kind of like clock off and you feel good about yourself. But as a manager, you have to like get your value from the team's performance, which is really different.
And it's funny you mentioned that, because I was listening to a podcast recently that I can't remember what it was, and someone in that mentioned that they were like, I think they were speaking to their friend, and their friend had said, I've just been 3 hours of meetings and I've done no work. And the person was like, well, you have been, meetings are your work, and as developers, you often think, oh, my output is how much code I've written, how many pull requests I've done. But actually, as a more experienced developer, you may have spent 2 hours, 1, 2, 3, however many hours pairing with someone. So actually there isn't a direct output in code, because that's not where your value is. Like, your value is sharing the knowledge, pairing. And so you're totally right that actually the perspective, it's really hard to change that perspective as you go through your career, to say, actually it isn't just about the code that I'm producing, how many pull requests, how many lines of code I've changed. Like actually you there's a high chance that you might not be doing that much, actually, like as you get more senior.
You tend to like live through the team. So if the team are doing well, then that makes you feel good, and then you feel like you're doing well. So it's all about the team performance at the end of the day. But it takes a while to get there, I think.
Yeah, definitely. Someone has said, considering your view on being a more generalist, do you have any advice for people that work better with focused learning but still want to be a jack of all trades?
Yeah, sure. So I think that you can focus on certain things at a time. So if you want to do, I think it's like trying to really critically look at yourself and where your strengths and weaknesses are, and then trying to work on that one at a time, basically. So, one developer on the team, we identified that GraphQL, which is what we use quite heavily, wasn't his strength. And so we found a course that kind of specialized in a GraphQL course. And he then spent, I think it was a couple of months doing that bit by bit. And once he had finished that, we're then moving into the system design side of things. So you have to just take it one thing at a time and not try and do everything. But it's like, okay, I've noticed that I've done a lot of React recently, but I don't really understand, what this one aspect of it. I'm going to focus on React for the next 4 weeks. And the fact we do career development sessions every month. So you've got a month to do something. And so say, okay, in this month we'll do this. And then we come back and go, okay, in the next month we'll do that. Or we'll carry on doing this thing because you haven't had time to do it, or you haven't done as much as you wanted to. So yeah, that's what I would encourage. But yeah, try not to just focus on one thing, especially if you're good at that one thing. It's always a tendency to be like, I know this, I'll pick up all the tickets for this, and I'll do that. It's great to be the go-to person for something, but you still need to, like, if everyone's not in the office and something goes wrong, you still need to be able to fix it.
Yeah. And I think it can also be really, you mentioned about, not try not to focus on too much, because actually I think it's really tempting, particularly when you join tech, you know, and it's, you know, it's maybe your first job to go, there's so much I want to learn and I'm just going to do it all. And I want to learn JavaScript, I want to learn Python, and I want to do this and I want to do this. And actually, one of the first things I say to people is, you're never going to know everything, so don't even try, because there is so much, you know, tech is huge. You know, every company does things slightly differently. You know, it may be that you've learned something and then it changes. So actually, you know, I like what you said, which is go, do you know what, actually, I've noticed that this is something that I want to get better at, this one thing, and I'm just going to focus on that for 1 month. And then the next month I'll pick something else. And I think that's a really nice way to approach it, rather than just doing too much all at once, because that can be really tempting.
It's so overwhelming. There's so much to learn. Even, you know, if it doesn't matter how many years experience you have, there is so much going on all of the time, and you have to just kind of pick one thing. I think once you're used to one stack as well, if you're somebody that does, you know, little hobby projects or side projects, one thing I've thought worked well is to change one aspect of the stack every time you do a new hobby. So if you're used to like React, Node, you know, Postgres, or something like that, just change maybe to like Next.js and try that instead, which is kind of, you know, kind of the same. Or instead of Postgres, use Dynamo, and then you're just using, you know, most of the stack, but that one thing, and then you can like figure out how that works without having to figure out an entire new stack, how everything works, because you'll just come to a standstill.
Well, I had something similar to that recently, where we asked someone at Codebar to build us like a little micro site, and she was like, oh, you know, I know this, can I use this, can I use this, can I use this? And I went, yep, all of that's fine. However, for your learning, let's try and use something else, so that like this is still a learning process for you. And then I said to her, have you ever used Tailwind before for the CSS, for the grid? You know, it means you can just build something really quickly that looks good. And she was like, no, I haven't. I said, okay, well then that's the challenge for this project. And again, it's like you said, like it was a really small thing. And then after, she was like, I'm so glad I used that, because I can build websites now much, much quicker without writing loads of this custom CSS. And I was like, perfect.
Yeah, that's brilliant.
Someone has said, what advice would you have for someone who's recently switched from a front-end position to a back-end position? They've got 2.5 years of experience, but only 6 months in my current back-end role, and it feels like starting again.
I think like knowing that feeling, you'll have that feeling for like throughout your career, and it's not a bad thing. It is a bit it's a little bit demotivating sometimes. You're like, oh, I've just got good at something and now I've been thrown into something else. But you're kind of early enough on in your career, I think, where you can be afforded time to learn, which is nice. The more senior you get, I think the less like patience people have. Not patience, but like, you know, you have to get up to speed very, very quickly. So if people are giving you that time to learn something new on the back end, that's really cool. Like, grab that opportunity, take that. But I think that like trying to, I don't know if you've got any exposure to the stuff that you used to do, but, you know, trying to mix it up a little bit. Something I've always, again, it's more about full stack, like, you know, full stack roles where you've got a mixture of front end and back end tickets. And if you're trying to learn the back end, still picking up some front end tickets to, you know, to give yourself that confidence that you do know what you're doing. And, you know, you know, it's just a different thing that you're trying to learn, and balancing that. It sounds like that isn't the case with this person. If you're kind of, if you've got specific front end and back end roles, and it may not be possible to do. Again, I know not everybody does it in the spare time, but like hobby projects to keep, you know, or little challenges online in the tech that, you know, might be really, again, just nice to make yourself feel, you know, feel more confident. But I think, especially if it's a different language in the back end and front end, that can be really hard. Other than trying to get that exposure to the tech that you already know, I'm not sure. I think it's just embrace the uncomfortableness sometimes.
I also think, like, to see it as it's not starting from scratch, because you still have all that experience.
Yeah.
It's almost like a new path.
Yeah.
Like, because what you'll find is the more senior you get, all that experience makes you really good, because you'll have that knowledge. So like, someone may ask you a question and you'll think back to that thing that you know. An example I have is, I did my degree. I started my degree in 2009, I think it was, 3-year degree. And as part of my degree, we did Flash. Now, Flash doesn't even exist nowadays, but that was part of my degree. And I remember then when, Apple killed it, and then, you're like, oh, Flash is dead now, but Flash was really good. And then now with CSS, you have keyframes and animation. And actually, you only got that now in CSS because keyframes was the main thing in Flash. So actually, even though they're two different things, actually I was aware of keyframes when I was looking at CSS and when it came out, because I was like, oh, well, yeah, I remember 6 years ago, keyframes was a thing in Flash, and it's not now, but actually it now has it. And so it's a really small example of it, that actually you're not starting from scratch. It's just a different path. And actually what you may find as you continue to go down this path is that things that you've learned previously will be useful to you.
It's a really good point. Yeah, especially the fact that as a front end developer what you need from a back end developer as well.
Yeah.
And so if you're a back end developer now, you've got the advantage of what the front end developer needs at different stages, and then maybe that could be very advantageous when you're working with them. So yeah, that's a very good point.
And also, you may not know what you're doing in a year. So it might be that you're like, oh, and if you've got a company, say a startup, that wants someone more full stack, actually you've now got experience in both of these areas. So that job you may be able to go for, whereas previously you wouldn't have had that back end experience, so you might not be able to go for it. So, and it goes back to what I was saying earlier, like tech is forever changing, and it's you can't really predict what you're going to do. So actually, I think having experience in both is incredibly useful. It just may not feel like it right now, because you're probably in that really frustrating moment, like time, where it's like, oh, it's just so annoying. Like,
yeah, one thing I loved about the back end is that everything is quite testable, whereas the front end I found to be increasingly hard to test all of the devices and the browsers and the so one thing that is really nice about back end, if you can embrace the fact that it's very testable, and it works, and then you can be like, it works.
Oh, perfect. Well, I think that's a really nice moment to end on, and there are no other questions. So yeah, there are no other questions. So thank you so much, Nikki, for coming along and giving this talk.